What the gov? 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 Hey, like, share, and comment on this video because when you do, we get to make more content. We're nothing without you. Hey, everybody. Welcome to WTG. What the gov? I'm Chuck Nice, and as always, I am joined by the inimitable Lizzy Shackelford, who is a professor, an author, a former State Department diplomat, and I'm completely honored to sit here and do this show with her every single week. Lizzy, what's happening?
Good to see you, Chuck. It's just a kind of cold Vermonty spring day here, but happy and very excited about who we've got to talk to today.
Yeah, we've got a good one, and I'm just going to tee it up this way. This gentleman was in the news for quite a bit because he held a very important position in government. And of course, that's what we talk about here. We don't talk about politics. We talk about government and good government because people don't appreciate all the great stuff that government does to make your life better. And that's what government is for. And, this gentleman was actually making your life a lot better without you even knowing it. And upon his departure, has talked to no one. And he's here to talk to us. So, Lizzy, tell us about our guest.
All right. Well, I'm very excited to have Mike Whitaker here, who was the former administrator for the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, a very, very important government function. He served in that role from 2023 until Inauguration Day this year, January 20th, 2025, when he resigned. He became a little bit of a household name last year when when Elon Musk got him in his crosshairs, but he's much more important for many other reasons, including a long and distinguished career in the aviation industry. He actually spent a lot of it in the private sector, starting his career at TWA, you might remember, an airline long ago, as a general counsel and a litigator, if I've got that right, Mike. And then 15 years with United Airlines, ultimately in a position of senior vice president. I am a United flyer. My husband's a United pilot, so we appreciate that. And he also had a role after that in the government as deputy FAA administrator back in 2013 to 2016. So Mike has a lot of experience in the private sector, a lot of experience in leadership in the public sector. And in case you think he might just be an office guy, he's actually a pilot himself and an advocate for aviation safety. So I can't think of anyone better today to talk to about how the government plays a role in keeping the skies safe. Well, welcome, Mike. Thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks, Lizzy and Chuck. Great to be here.
There are people who are familiar with you. You became a household name for quite a period. And there were, I'll say, issues surrounding your departure on Inauguration Day. You haven't talked about it, so we want to respect that. But whatever context you want to give us on that, I would love to hear.
Well, I think, my reasoning for stepping down really had to do with the wishes of the incoming president, who I think made it very clear as a candidate and as a president-elect that he wanted his own people in the jobs running agencies. And I made the decision that I would let him do that. So I stepped aside for him to put his own leadership at FAA.
That's pretty, I will say, mature of you. But what is the term for the FAA administrator?
Well, it's normally a 5-year term. That it hasn't always been that way, and I think it's been mixed results getting people to stay 5 years. Under any circumstances, it's difficult to make that transition. A lot of your leadership team is made up of political appointees who would come in if you were from the other party and look at you suspiciously, whether it's a Democrat changing to a Republican administration or vice versa. And I've heard from some folks who've gone through that, and it's not always a pleasant situation in normal times, but this was not a normal time because the president made it very clear he wanted everybody from the Biden administration out, including people who had been in the Trump administration before the Biden administration, like the TSA administrator. So, and he's kept his word on that. He's cleaned house pretty good.
Mike, you did spend most of your career in the private sector, and that's kind of a different culture in a lot of ways. I'm curious why you chose to go into public service when you were asked, and what your impression was of the civil servants that served around you.
Well, it's true. I in my long career now, I spent about 30 years in industry and about 4.5 years in government. So a vast majority of my experience has been in industry. My first tour of duty was as the number two at FAA, starting in 2013. I was shocked at the quality of the people and the complexity of the operation. That was my first impression when I joined. And I would say, having been on both sides of the equation, it's not, I think people on the outside of government have this view that, government employees don't work very hard or they're not very smart, and private industry is finely tuned machines that operate with great efficiency. And that's not really been my experience on either side of the equation. I've worked for some terrible CEOs. I've seen some brilliant people in government, some people who work long, long hours in government and do amazing work. So I think the stereotypes are largely incorrect, and I think you find good and bad on both sides of the fence.
Now, did
Yeah.
the deep state give you the secret handshake when you came into your leadership position?
Well, I was the deep state when I was there.
Ah,
So I think, in a way, the deep state is all those professional civil servants doing their jobs and making things happen
Hmm.
uh, day in and day out. The civil service, does a great function, and you need that to make government work and not be a
right.
chaotic disaster.
Do you find that there is less political ideology at work among civil service servants than people would imagine?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I would say it depends on where you work. And as I went through the confirmation process to be FAA administrator, I made the point, something I believe, which is aviation is a nonpartisan issue. The laws of aerodynamics and gravity, apply whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, and they apply whether you believe in science or don't believe in science. So it's
Right.
really one of those unique areas where you can get a consensus on
Hmm.
something. I was confirmed 98 to nothing, which I don't think happened very often in the last decade. But I'm not an inherently political person. I haven't spent my life doing political things. I've spent my life in the aviation business, and that was the case I made. And I think FAA needs to be run in a nonpartisan way.
Uh, I would love for you to give us kind of like an overview of how the FAA keeps us safe in ways that we may not think about as people who travel by air
Yeah.
a lot.
It's a great question. I mean, it's a very complicated system, and I think sometimes it's challenging to boil it down to an understandable way. The air traffic control system is very complicated. How airplanes operate is very complicated. But fundamentally, the FAA's role is to make sure all the operators in the system are operating the way they should, obeying the rules. The FAA sets standards for how they operate, and then ensures that they are actually operating that way. There's something that we call SMS, which is safety management systems, that almost all actors in the aviation system have to have. So Boeing has to have one, airlines have to have one. And that safety management system basically is a set of procedures around safety, and it encourages people to speak up when they have a concern about safety, and it encourages companies to have really good risk assessment tools so they can find risk in the system, and then they act on those risks. So FAA's role is to really make sure everybody's doing their part. And when they're not doing their part, hold them to task. And I think it's useful to think of flying as sort of three phases of flight, or three areas where we control traffic, and those controllers have to talk to each other and coordinate. One is obviously in the airport environment, and that's obviously a very complex environment with all the taxiing, lining up for takeoff, planes taking off, planes landing. Then you have the very busy airspace around a hub. So that as you mentioned, the TRACON, the approach and departure control, that's very complicated airspace. Then you have the high altitude airspace that's controlled by air traffic control centers that really just deal with airplanes that are already at 32,000 feet and the like. They all have to talk to each other. I think if you think about a flight leaving New York going to LA, Um, we know those airports in New York are incredibly complicated. The air traffic control tower gets those airplanes to the end of the runway and gives them authority to take off. Then they talk a lot on the radio. The controller will tell the pilot to change frequencies and talk to the departure center that gets them through that busy New York airspace. And then they'll be at 30 some thousand feet all the way across. And they get handed off as they go through different centers. So they'll get handed off probably a dozen times at that high altitude airspace. Each one of those is a radio communication. And then they'll come down into the very complicated Los Angeles airspace and get guided through on specific routes and come in and land at that airport and go back into the hands of the air traffic control tower. So it's complicated. There's a lot of talking. There's some movement toward using more data transmissions, but it's still pretty old school.
Yeah, the air traffic controllers are something that's been in the news a lot. One of the initiatives that you had championed, Mike, while you were at the FAA was this 10-hour rule, right? Where an air traffic controller gets 10 hours between shifts a minimum. And I was reading about that, and my question was, why in God's name do we have to advocate for that? Because if I had to go back to work and I teach and write and read for a living, I think I would be a danger to people if I went back in less than 10 hours. And so I'm curious, like, is this, I mean, first of all, it's an example of the types of regulations that are important for safety. But how hard is it to advocate for things that will make this work more safely in the industry?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I come from the airline industry, and pilots and flight attendants lobbied for decades to get rest rules and proper fatigue rules, particularly for international flying where your body clock is messed up.
Yeah.
And they fought for those extra rest periods. The controllers have resisted having rest periods, and while that's a little counterintuitive, I think the reasoning was that they were able to work a schedule that involved, in any given week, working all different shifts: morning shift, afternoon shift, overnight shift, and cramming them in together so you could get a whole week's worth of work in 3.7 days. And what that did is it gave you a long weekend where you were really, really tired and probably grumpy and kicking the kids. When I first joined, I went around and met with controllers in different environments, and a lot of bloodshot eyes, a lot of fatigue, and a lot of people working overtime on top of that brutal schedule because of the shortage. And so we put together a little team. It was a Harvard Medical School sleep expert, a NASA sleep expert, and a former NTSB sleep expert. And they looked at that schedule and they said, this is not okay, and the fatigue level and your performance with those fatigue levels is improper. So I first issued an order putting those rules in place. Mm-hmm. That didn't go over that well with the controller union, so we had some negotiation to implement that in the schedules that started in 2025. So they now have rest rules. They get rid of that schedule, which was called the Rattler, which kind of tells you a little bit about the effect of working that
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah. We have to address this. You leave, no one takes over. Okay? All right. I mean, somebody's running it, but no one's responsible. And then all of a sudden, the dude from MTV Road Rules is out there talking about the FAA and what the FAA is doing. It's almost like someone said, road rules, that's like transportation, so you get to pay. So, and not to mention, okay, just happened a little while ago. We'll let the people listen to the actual tape. Here it is. Here's the tape. Just listen to it.
That's 674 approach. 74, radar contact lost. We lost our radar. So just stay on the arrival and maintain 6,000. No, you do not have a Bravo clearance. We lost our radar and it's not working correctly. Radar service terminates, squawk VFR, frequency change approved. If you want a Bravo clearance, you can just call the towers when you get closer.
Okay, I'll wait for that frequency from you, okay?
Okay, no, just squawk VFR, look up the tower frequencies, and we don't have a radar, so I don't know where you are.
Should we be concerned?
Well, we'll come back to the should we be concerned question, because I know we're going to talk about safety and how it's safe to get around. Let me kind of break these into a couple buckets. One is we have, there are a lot of functions around aviation, but the accident investigation function, which once upon a time belonged to the FAA's predecessor, was taken away and put in an independent agency that operates with complete independence, and that's the NTSB, the Transportation Safety Board.
Okay.
They do an amazing job of just focusing on safety and what happened and what needs to be fixed. And in a typical air accident, there are often multiple factors that will contribute to an accident, and we try to learn from those factors and make sure we rectify whatever problems were there. That has been the traditional model. We're trying to get in front of that a little bit by looking at data and using some of the AI tools and other things to find some of these risks before they happen. With respect to the loss of communications, the system, the air traffic system has famously got some very outdated equipment. It's been underfunded for decades for reasons that are complicated, but it just has. The facilities we talked about, the TRACONs and the centers, most of those were designed to be have a lifespan of 50 years. The high altitude centers, for example, all of them are over 60 years old now, and they are outdated and they need to be upgraded. The communication system is particularly out of date. It operates with copper wire, and there's a very long-term program to upgrade it. That's what was approved by Congress. That's what's being implemented, and it's stressed. And what the FAA does when they have failures like that, they have a lot of redundancy in the system, but when they have failures, they reduce the amount of traffic that they can handle. So it's not impacting safety typically. I don't know the specifics of what happened at Newark, but what it tends to do is it impacts efficiency because they'll reduce the amount of traffic they can handle. And there are redundancies in the system so that the airplanes still can see each other and talk to each other and stay on their predetermined course. But it causes the system to be a lot less efficient. And that's something that really needs to be, particularly that communication infrastructure really needs to be upgraded quickly.
Oh, I like what you said there. That really helped me, because what you're really saying is when the system is taxed to that extent and the burden is too much, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the system is not going to work, because what we do is we lighten the load.
That's correct.
We just lighten the load so that the system can bear what's happening. As a result, you as a traveler will still be safe, but you're definitely going to be inconvenienced.
And that's what happens when you get a big storm that's coming through, and you've got good visibility that the storm is going to hit Dallas. I'll use an example because this happened to me a couple weeks ago. The storm is going to come through. You're going to have thunder showers, and the airlines operating in Dallas know this, and they start canceling flights. And they do that because if you're normally taking off 60 operations an hour, and a thunderstorm comes through, you're only going to be able to have 40 operations an hour. You've got to cull that schedule out. And that's what happens. And I think the airlines are doing a better job over time in getting in front of that and canceling the day before instead of waiting until you get to the airport and that type of thing.
So you just made me feel really great, because now when I have canceled flights, I'll know that it's so that I can stay alive.
So I've got a question on the, because as you said, like the communication systems, a lot of the systems need dire updating. And one of the challenges is that we've seen just an explosion in air travel in recent years, in recent decades, and it's not able to keep up. But it seems like this administration, not just on transportation and air travel, but on a lot of things, is interested in privatizing more. And so kind of shifting more things that the government controls to private businesses, and possibly private businesses owned by friends of the president in some cases. But I'm curious what you think. I mean, with a long private sector background in government, what do you think about kind of the risks or benefits, or both, of privatizing more of these roles?
Ooh.
Well, it's an interesting question, and I guess I would start by saying that when you look at the air traffic control system, it involves an awful lot of private companies already. The companies that provide the computers in the control towers, the radars, the software. A lot of these, certainly the communications network is all private companies providing that as a service. So there's a lot of private involvement already in the air traffic system. What we've seen in other countries is they have separated the air traffic operation from the safety regulator in most countries now, and I think that is best practice. If you're ensuring all the operators are doing a good job, and you're an operator, that's a little bit of a conflict of interest. So a lot of them have created a separate government agency for the air traffic control organization with a governing board and that type of thing. That is, I think, the easiest option to get to, and one we should look at for safety reasons and possibly efficiency reasons as well. And then some have gone a step further and privatized the operation. But privatized is a funny word because it's a complete monopoly. So it would have to be a regulated monopoly, which is kind of like being a government agency. It's not that different. But I do think there's a lot of value in looking at separating air traffic from the safety regulator. And then when you get to how you're going to operate, the procurement rules are onerous and could use a little streamlining. But at the end of the day, you're going to rely on a lot of private sector companies to provide the technology, the communication, the surveillance facilities and things that you need to operate that system. So it is part of the equation.
How do you make sure that there's, that is not so much a profit motive directing kind of safety concerns? I guess I would just use as an example the Elon Musk pushback for Starlink last year when his company was, when SpaceX, when it was creating problems in the air, and for the owner of that business, he didn't understand why those minor inconveniences for air travel were something that his company should be responsible for, I guess. So how do you make sure that the private companies involved in these spaces are absolutely prioritizing safety? Because government without a profit motive, there are pros and cons to that, but you can feel pretty confident that safety is high on that list.
Yeah, and I'll come back to the idea of separating out the ATC from the safety regulator. But if you think of the FAA as making sure you're complying with the regulations and doing your job, so if an airline is having an unusual number of issues, wheels falling off or overshooting runways or whatever, the FAA has an index. They're constantly monitoring the airline and like, okay, we need to up our review. Let's do a special audit. They get in there and look at their processes and procedures, make sure they're operating correctly. If they find things that aren't working, they can issue civil penalties. They can shut them down if they need to. You have that enforcement mechanism, and that same level of oversight needs to happen with the air traffic organization. So if it were a private organization or if it was a separate government agency, the FAA would be the regulator. These would be the standards. These are the safety standards that you have to meet. And any technology you're deploying, you have to prove that it's safe. There have to be redundancies, and it has to go through a whole certification process. So as long as you have a strong regulator, you can control those pretty well.
It sounds to me though like everything you're saying costs money and needs manpower, but
People power, Chuck.
people power. I'm sorry, Lizzy. Listen, I'm trying my best, and I don't mind trying my best. I love to be corrected like that. But people power, and we're living in a time now where public sentiment kind of is like kill the government, and that means don't give money to this, and don't hire people to do it. So how do we reconcile this?
Not liking the government is kind of I guess probably has always been a national pastime, but it kind of depends on what you mean, because then people will say, well, I don't mean the military. I like the military. Well, I don't mean my Social Security because I like my Social, so, what depends on what you mean by that. And I think most people think it's good to have a safety regulator. If you look at the events around the Boeing plug door last year when it blew out of the Alaska airline flight, I put a cap on Boeing's production. They couldn't make over 38 airplanes a month until they fixed their safety and quality problems. We issued fines and civil penalties, investigations, audits. We came down pretty hard on them. I never had a single member of Congress say, we think you're being too hard on Boeing. Not a one on either side of the House or Senate. So I think most people think it's good to have a safety regulator that keeps the sky safe. On the money and people thing, I'm actually don't really think it's a money problem. I think there needs to be a redesign of how the air traffic system operates. I think the funding is easy to get if you can figure out the redesign. The people is a real issue, though. It is harder to find aerospace engineers, pilots, mechanics, air traffic controllers, the whole ecosystem. The number of young people who are choosing those professions is going down. And that is a challenge. It's a challenge for FAA. It's a challenge for the airlines and really all the operators in the system.
On the regulatory side, I mean, I think you're right. I think most people want to know that the skies are regulated when they take flights, and we all fly a lot. DOGE and this current administration is very interested in striking regulations, reducing regulations, and getting rid of them willy-nilly. They seem to have, cut a lot of things, and they're like, we'll figure out if that was important later. How do you think that's going to impact the FAA in particular if they're kind of ripping out regulations? I mean, do you think that airlines, that the aviation industry is regulated too much, not regulated enough? Where do you think that direction's going to go?
It's kind of an unusual situation with aviation because basically under U.S. law for decades, you can't really operate in the airspace unless it's pursuant to a rule and we let you do it. So it's a model where it's prohibited unless it's permitted kind of thing. So regulations that are coming out of FAA often are permissive regulations that will enable new technologies to operate in the airspace. Or there'll be simplifications of more complex regulations so that they work better and adapt to new technology. So for example, drones, we need an entire regulatory structure for drone operations so you can have your pizza delivered in 12 minutes. And advanced air mobilities, flying taxis, these need a whole regulatory system in place so they can operate. Last year, we did a rule that created operating rules for advanced air mobility, which industry was very happy about because now that means they could actually operate these flying taxis. If you can't do those regulations, unless you're just going to say, hey, it's a free-for-all, anyone wants to fly into space, just have fun, which I don't think is where we're going to go. You have to have those regulations. So in the case of FAA, at least, these regulations are enabling new business and new operations.
I fly in and out of both Washington National and Newark a lot. And I mean, should we be concerned right now? Because there seem to be not kind of single points of failure for the most part, but it had been until that accident. It had been since, what was it, 2009? Was it since we had the last commercial civilian jet crash? Are you as a, as a passenger, as just a user of these of aviation, are you changing any of your behavior right now? Or are you still just as confident in flying the friendly skies?
The only time I'm ever afraid to fly is when I'm the pilot. So
note to self: do not fly with Mike.
Do not fly with my wife. Won't fly with me. So that's no. It is a safe system. I read recently that the U.S. ranks 87th for highway safety in the world. So there are 86 countries that do a better job of road safety than we do, which is I didn't even know there were 87 countries.
Well, they don't have Boston. Come on, let's be for real.
Yeah, well, so I mean, if you're going to break into a cold sweat, it shouldn't be when you're on an airplane. It should be when you get in the car. But that's not how we view it mentally. Right. I think there's a huge opportunity with what's happening with data and machine learning and AI for the FAA to do a much better job of finding risks in the system. There's a massive amount of data that's generated in the system every single day, that's generated in engines that go to the manufacturers, that the airlines are reporting to Boeing and Airbus, what's happening in ATC. And I think the next level of safety is to really deploy those tools to find risks. And it's you don't know if they would have found this risk for national, but I suspect there were indicators, and if we had the right tools to deploy, might have understood those risks a little bit better. So I think that's really an opportunity. We started doing that. We did a data challenge last year at FAA, and got some really interesting results. And I know the new administration is also very focused on that as an initiative. So more important than ATC, I think industry really needs to align around that safety initiative. We definitely have to upgrade ATC, but I wouldn't conflate the safety issues with ATC. ATC in our history hasn't really produced a lot of accidents. It may or may not have been a factor in some of these recent accidents, but I think the safety opportunity is really where the payoff will come.
What role is DEI playing in the safety of the skies? Because the Trump administration seems to think that it's just a fundamental issue with whether or not our flights are safe. And, I feel like I've actually seen people posting on the social medias about how my pilot was X, Y, or Z, and I was worried. And it just, they've drawn.
Well, let me tell you, just to say, Lizzy, okay, when I get on a plane and I see a black pilot, I'm like, I'm out of here. Okay, no soul plane for me, baby.
So I'll answer this with a few factoids. If the mission was DEI for the past 20 years, we haven't been very effective at it. So 20 years ago, there were 16.4% women as air traffic controllers. I think it's now 16.7%. So I wouldn't call that a great success. The population of minorities and women in the pilot ranks is pretty low. And I think the more important thing is every single pilot, every single air traffic controller goes through the same exact training requirements, the same testing, the same recurrent testing. There is no special track for DEI. That does not exist. I will say that some years ago, the FAA studied why there are so few people of color and women in the air traffic controller ranks, and they found some possible areas of bias in the process, and they changed the process to try to ameliorate that. So for example, air traffic controllers were interviewing candidates, and that doesn't necessarily add a lot of value, but it does create an opportunity for people to say, oh, your uncle's Bill who works over in, you're going to go right through here. So the FAA has tried to take bias out of the system, but I know of not a single pilot or air traffic controller or mechanic that got a free pass.
Well, that's good to know that the woke mind virus has not infected the hiring of pilots. So
I'm curious where we are now, a few months into this administration, looking at what the FAA is doing from the perspective of industry. What are they doing that's giving you confidence, and what are they doing that might be giving you pause as industry and as a customer? And if you were in that position still today, are there things that you would be prioritizing?
Well, a lot of pieces of that question. I guess I'll start by saying I think FAA's priorities should always be safety, and you would, I guess, expect me to say that, but
Hope so.
I don't mean just like a poster in the break room that says safety first, but actually focused every day on where are the risks, what can we do, how do we mitigate those risks, and I think that is the primary role of the FAA. And one of the reasons why I think moving air traffic to a separate organization is a good idea. I think I can't comment because I'm not there. I don't really know what's going on other than what you read in the papers. But I think the real opportunity is to get more investment into an air traffic infrastructure. The airline industry is really the engine of the U.S. economy. And it creates commerce, it creates travel for people, and you want that infrastructure to be top notch, and it's not. The communication backbone is not where it needs to be, and I think that's been identified. But I think we need to really have a new air traffic, not just refresh the one we have with new equipment that does the same thing, but have a new air traffic control system that is more technology oriented, has better tools for controllers, and moves us away from all the voice communication that happens that probably doesn't really need to be happening that way. And we need to kind of roll up our sleeves and do the hard work to be very specific about what that is.
Well, don't you think that pilots would be really sad not to get to chit chat as they're flying from New York to LA? Because that's a really long way.
Yeah,
It
and
could
they
be
all have those great
overnight.
voices, like, yeah,
Well, they
this
have
is about
iPads and can read books and things. There's plenty to do in the cockpit. So,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, you really want to take. I mean, voice communications are challenging. If you ever listen to an ATC tape, you're just like, how does anybody understand either side of that microphone? And of course, if that's your job, you get used to it. But I always feel bad for the foreign pilots coming in who probably have English as a second language, trying to talk to a New Yorker, getting their
But is it
instruction.
like the
It's
same
impressive.
ones who you hear in the airport? Because I have no idea what they're saying. I can never
Yeah.
understand that.
It's great. You can plug in and listen to ATC all day long. There are websites you can do that, and it's impressive the battery. But in the airport environment, it gets really complex. Most of the trip is not quite that troublesome.
Well, I've been waiting to say this all show. It's time to return your seatbacks to the upright position and put up your tray tables because we got to land this bad boy. And we're going to say goodbye to Mike. And of course, that means coming up is Corruption Junction. But Mike, man, thanks so much for the really illuminating discussion. And I really feel better about getting on these flights that I'm about to get on. I got about 5 coming up right now. They're all out of Newark.
Oh no!
Ooh, well,
I don't even think Mike would
can't
support
promise
that.
an on-time departure, but I think you're taking the safest means of transportation.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for your service. We always
Great,
appreciate the public
great being
service.
here. Yeah, thank you very much.
Appreciate you. All right, guys, you know what that means. It means it's time for Corruption Junction. Corruption Junction, what's your function? Hooking up billionaires to the money.
I wanted to just start, Chuck, with the basic concept of corruption and why it's bad. This sounds pretty oversimplified, but let's just be honest today. A lot of stuff is happening out in the open, and it's so out in the open, people could watch it and say, but if that were bad, wouldn't they try to hide it?
Because you can't hide a 747.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a challenge. I will say when I was a US diplomat, I had to turn down planes all the time. Wasn't allowed to keep a single one. Not one. So I wanted to start with just why do you think, Chuck, that the fact that Trump and his family are making money hand over fist while he's the president?
I have heard about the emoluments clause.
Why don't I read the emoluments clause then? Shall I read it?
Well, let me just give my little thing here, and then you can tell me how good I do. Okay.
Quiz.
So, I'm thinking that the founders, coming from a monarchy where tribute was paid as a kind of common thing amongst monarchies. And tribute is normally if you conquer a land or a lesser party wants your favor, they bring you gifts so that you will do what they want you to do. So, and the king is the only person who benefits from that. The people do not. All right, so that's what I'm thinking.
I mean, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good rendition of it. I mean, yeah, you get to the core reasoning there, which is like, a kingdom is there to serve the king, whereas a country, the United States, is there to serve the people. And so this was the concept back in the day. The emoluments clause specifically says that no person holding any office of profit or trust shall, without consent of Congress, no, you can get consent of Congress, the people's office, to do this, but without consent of Congress, no one shall accept any present, emolument, office, title of any kind whatsoever from any king, prince, or foreign state. So, do you know what an emolument is, Chuck?
So it sounds like emollient, which is what you put on your lips.
It's not. It's
Like this. See, this is my emolument. Yum.
that's close if you were to use your lip chap for payment, because emolument is a payment. So
Okay.
the basic idea, though, is during the Revolution, we had the Continental Congress that was, kind of running the nascent American state. And at the time, there were members of the Continental Congress that Great Britain was paying off to be spies. They were paying them in gold and silver in order to basically serve Great Britain's interest rather than America's interest. And so
Okay.
this was of such incredible importance to our founders that they put it in the Constitution. This isn't just illegal, it's unconstitutional, because they wanted to ensure that people in positions of power and trust who run our government were serving the people, not themselves, and certainly not a foreign state. And so the Emoluments Clause is really about foreign interference, and it is in the Constitution because of this great fear that the power of our country would be utilized on behalf of other countries' interests, because the person who's wielding that power is getting paid off. And so that's where we are.
We the people. So if somebody's getting paid for themselves, that is not we the people. And so it's unconstitutional. Something I did not realize. Unconstitutional to receive gifts.
That's bad. That's very bad. And you might think that because you're doing it out in the streets in plain daylight, it can't be that bad. But my friend, it is that bad. And that's why we need folks like Congress and others to kind of step up
and be a check and a balance. And you're absolutely right about the out in the open thing.
Got to watch out. We know what Trump wants really at the end of the day, and he wants a kingdom. So he's working on his way to that. We gotta rein that in. So you know what the risk is with this? The risk, if we have a president who is making decisions because he's getting paid off for them. You know what the risk is of that, Chuck?
I have an idea, but it could mean something like Russia or China kind of puppeteering what they want over here in the U.S. Because one individual is getting benefits.
Yeah. I mean, it's really as simple as, it's not even necessarily adversaries that are trying to do something, kind of negative to the U.S. It's just, if you think this is how you get results from the U.S. government, that's what you do.
Oh.
So there are a couple of examples recently. Vietnam's not a bad country. Vietnam's one of our friends, but Vietnam has been the target of a potential 46% tariff. And Vietnam gets about 30% of its GDP from trade with the United States. So that is a lot of money for Vietnam. Right. Well, Vietnam recently got a visit from Donald Trump's son, Eric Trump, and he went over there and had this conversation because they've been trying to get a big Trump golf resort and a high-rise Trump tower approved by the Vietnamese government. And the Vietnamese prime minister said recently that Eric's visit, quote, motivated us to expedite that activity. So why would they be doing that? Because they're currently in negotiations with the United States over the tariffs that are impacting their country. So they realize the way to get a better outcome on those tariffs is to basically buy off the Trump family with some favorable deals.
So let it be written. So let it be done.
Basically. One more example. United Arab Emirates, UAE. Recently closed a bunch of real estate deals with the Trump family right after Donald Trump had visited the country, or when he was visiting the country. And, all of these countries that are doing deals with the Trump family right now, they all want something from the U.S. What do you think the UAE wants?
I don't know, to be honest. I do not know.
The UAE was prohibited from receiving high-tech chips coming out of the United States
As well, they should be. Because,
Well,
yeah, I mean, come on. These high-tech chips are all about, these are companies that are making chips that aren't in, we never see these chips in our computers or our phones.
super high tech, super high
These
tech.
chips are like, they are going to run the world.
They are. Now, we might not be that worried about UAE having them typically, but this particular UAE company is very close to guess which country?
I'm going to say Russia.
No,
China.
China.
Yeah, because China, by the way, is trying their best. This is where they're lagging behind us, people. So when you hear about the future of our economy, you hear it always tied to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is inexorably tied to these chips that Lizzy is talking about. China is lagging behind us in the development of this technology.
They want that tech.
If the UAE gets the chips from us and they're cool with China, they now have a bargaining chip with China because of us, okay? And that's what they want. This is what Taiwan is all about, okay? Taiwan is all about the chips. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah,
It's all about the chips.
So draw this all back, Chuck. And what are we talking? We're talking about laws and regulations that were put in place for U.S. national security interest and economic interest. And they are being changed out of convenience for something that the Trump family is interested in.
Holy moly.
So that's why this stuff matters at the end of the day.
There you go. Well, look at that. I feel really good about Corruption Junction. I mean, I don't feel good about corruption, okay? But I feel good about this segment. Well, there you have it. We have come to the end of the show, Lizzy. I thought it was a good one, but then I'm a little biased.
I think it's pretty fascinating. I mean, I do feel better, I think, about, not going to Newark. I don't know why you do that.
Here's what I'm counting on. I'm going to be honest, and this might be a miscalculation. I'm counting on everybody being afraid to fly out of Newark, and then that makes flying out of Newark so much easier.
All right.
But
I'm going to wait on your report for this before I try doing that myself.
I'll be your canary in the coal mine.
Okay.
Then. All right. All right, guys. Well, listen, thanks so much for joining us. What the Gov. And remember, if government is people, my friend.
What the Gov is Gov.
What the Gov? What the Gov? What the Gov? What the Gov? What the Gov?